Hi, everyone. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about sustainable funding. And my goal is to kind of walk through some ways that we might be able to talk about this rather popular buzzword in terms of viability. I think sustainable funding is being thrown around a lot in terms of restoration, and I'll explain why. But it's important for partnerships, which are the groups that I work with directly, to think a little bit about the types of costs associated with implementing different types of strategies to achieve sustainable funding. So while I kick this off, I'd like to kind of define what I think sustainable funding means in the work that I'm doing. And that is that the funding streams that you're working for are ongoing. In other words, they have sort of a long-term element to them. They are reliable. In other words, they are consistent to some extent, and they have some discretionary aspect to them, so that they can be spent on work as needed to allow for adaptive management and some of the capacity costs that are the hidden costs that I think Jamie and Anna did a good job of discussing in their presentation. Next slide. So why does sustainable funding necessary, and why does it need to be ongoing and reliable? This diagram is sort of an attempt at showing the more conservative timelines associated with some of the elementary stages or the very basic stages associated with a common restoration project. So typically you have your planning and partnership building phases, which can be a sort of easy transition into getting different partners on board and working together, putting together a plan, or it can be a more involved process. On the conservative end, it's a 1 to 2 year endeavor. In a less conservative setting, it might be more like 5 years. So that in and of itself requires a great deal of capacity to kick these efforts off, to get partnerships to be assembled and coordinated, to hire facilitators, etc. And that's just getting the project started. Then you have the actual implementation, which many partnerships estimate to take 5 years up front, but there are a lot of residual activities that flow into the monitoring and maintenance phase, and so 5 years is kind of, again, a rather conservative estimate for that time. Then you have the monitoring and maintenance, which can be sort of a 5 to 20 year horizon, and in some cases might be ad infinitum. So, you know, if you're looking at those timelines, it can be really challenging to think through how you're going to cover the costs for all of those activities. Another point to highlight is that fundraising is a component of each of those stages. You need to be able to fundraise and be adaptive in your fundraising strategies throughout those different steps because they entail different types of activities. So thinking through what a sustainable funding strategy and fundraising plan might look like at the early stages of your project could really benefit you when you get to that monitoring and maintenance phase. Next slide, please. So this is a diagram exhibiting some of the results that we received from a survey that the Tamarisk Coalition conducted in September of 2014, which was focused on trying to get a better sense for what the challenges, fundraising challenges that restoration practitioners encounter. And this is one of many pretty interesting results that we received, but I think it's worth highlighting because it was demonstrated in our survey that two of the most challenging types of or work components of restoration to fund are the planning and project management, aka the capacity side, and the monitoring. And these are, you know, two of the activities that really kind of bolster the actual on-the-ground implementation. And so it's really important for us to think of this restoration work as a continuum of activities, not that capacity is separate from the on-the-ground restoration, which is separate from the monitoring and maintenance. We try to think of it as all part of one comprehensive planning restoration activity so that we can really understand that the fundraising needs to be consistent so as to ensure all of these aspects of the project work are being completed. And if you're interested in seeing some of the other survey results, I'd be happy to talk to you about that offline. Next slide, please. On that slide, one other point to take into account is that our survey indicated that not only were they the most difficult to fund, but they're also, therefore, the most difficult for grant resources to support, because grants tend to be really focused on that, on the grant component. Oh, right. Is that better? Sorry. Could you hear anything I said? All right. I don't need to backtrack? I don't get to push reset? Okay. All right. So, sustainable. So we talked about the long-term and the need for ongoing funding and reliable funding. We talked about why it needs to be discretionary, because in many cases, again, grant funding is very specific in nature and does not support a lot of these kind of hidden costs that, again, Anna and Jamie helped break out. So capacity, monitoring, and challenging to fund. And so what I think sustainable funding should look like is a diverse funding portfolio. I think it's important for a given partnership or organization that's doing this type of work to think outside of the grants box and to realize that there are a lot of other potential funding streams out there. And the presentation that Beth Bardwell gave from Audubon, New Mexico is a great example of an innovative way to find funding for a water transaction market. And if you're interested in learning more about that, that'll be recorded and you can find that on our website at a future point. In any case, so this pyramid is a common one in terms of looking at nonprofit funding strategies. And what it shows is that really, ideally, in a diverse funding portfolio, grants are the smallest portion of your funding portfolio. And then you have corporate donations or giving. Then you have perhaps events and membership. Then you have earned income strategies, surcharges, payment for watershed services, any number of other types of more innovative techniques. And then the true core of your funding should be coming from private donations, foundations, because those are the types of funding that can be cultivated over time, that can be reliable, and that are discretionary in their nature. So the other thing to point out is that as you go down or up, down the pyramid, the capacity demands of these different types of strategies increase. So you really need to think about how you're going to allocate your time and resources for each of these strategies. Some partnerships and organizations have adequate capacity to move all of these different types of strategies forward simultaneously, and some need to be very selective. And we often work in small rural areas with small organizations that have limited capacity. So to determine how best to gauge which strategies you employ, you kind of need to go through a cost-benefit analysis. Next slide, please. So this table is an example, and this is hypothetical, a lot of these numbers, but it gives you an idea for how you might lay out which strategies are going to bring in certain dollars and what the cost of those are. And how you can kind of determine the value that they add to your funding portfolio given the discretionary nature of the funding. So column 1 is obviously the source of funding. Column 2 is the total number of dollars brought in from each of those funding sources. Column 3 is the cost associated with that. So that could be everything from indirect costs to the amount of capacity that it requires to fundraise for through those avenues. The fourth column is the net income, so that's the column 2 minus column 3. And then you look at the last two columns, and that illustrates to you the extent to which those funding streams are discretionary in nature. And this is a really simple table, but I think it's a really valuable exercise for partnerships to undertake to determine if the strategies that they're currently employing are actually yielding the dollars that they are expecting or netting. And it should be noted that some of these strategies require sort of a couple years investment to yield the funding streams that are hoped for or anticipated. So when you're looking at a private donor campaign, for example, there's a great deal of relationship building and courting that needs to take place in the first few years for different types of donors. And then, in year 4, you get a $100,000 gift. So it's important to kind of weigh that in this process of looking at the cost-benefit of pursuing different strategies. Next slide, please. So I know this is kind of a crazy slide, but I think this is sort of the brain dump that needs to happen to figure out who your audiences and your markets are, because that's kind of the other piece. There's a lot of, I think, pretty specific thinking about what your project, what kind of sector it falls into or field. It's riparian restoration, and we're creating habitat for endangered birds. Well, there are a lot of different impacts and benefits that that project work can bring to different audiences. And so when you're thinking about pursuing different and diverse strategies, it's pretty key to think about all of the audiences, benefits, and other factors that might be benefiting from the work that you're doing. So I think, although this is kind of, again, an eclectic and busy slide, it gives you a sense for, we're doing a riparian restoration project, and it has an outreach and education component, which engages youth, it engages the community. There's a stewardship angle. There could be a public health angle, getting people outdoors. You have the invasive plant removal component of the work, which is improves recreation, so you're appealing to boaters, kayakers, you're improving tourism in that area, economic development. The invasive plant removal employs people. You have benefits on potentially at-risk youth or veterans or Native American populations if you're working through some of these conservation corps programs. So there's a whole spectrum of different opportunities here and different funding streams that follow those benefits. And so I think that is a key strategy for determining which of the sustainable funding mechanisms might be worthwhile to pursue. So I was going to walk through some of the partnerships that I'm working directly with and how they're going about kind of doing this audience analysis and developing their sustainable funding portfolios. The first example is the Dolores River Restoration Partnership in Southwest Colorado. And they have a transition plan, which they developed on the heels of their implementation plan, and that's outlines their monitoring maintenance activities up until 2020. And the initial projections for the cost of that are in the $1.2 million range, and I would say that's probably a pretty conservative estimate. And some of the strategies that they have outlined to implement that plan and that fundraising goal are to outreach to Bureau of Land Management, who is one of their key partners and who is one of the main land managers in the river corridor. And that's a key strategy because they need to be a sustained partner. They are integral to that project, and so it may seem obvious, but really, if they lose that partner, then the project falls apart. They are outreaching to the state of Colorado, looking to replenish funding that they have received through them and to sustain them as a partner. They're outreaching to existing and new grant sources, and they are initiating a private donor campaign that's going to highlight trying to attract donations from tourists to the region and working with local businesses. So they're in the process of undergoing a communications planning effort, which will help put together strategic outreach to these audiences that they know have some kind of stake in the work that they're doing. The next example is the Escalante River Restoration Partnership. They are in the process of implementing their 10-year action plan and their woody invasive plan, and that will be, or is estimated to be completed in 2020 as well. And they are also developing a communications plan to outline implementation strategies for their funding plan. And they are doing outreach to new foundations and grant programs. And they are doing outreach. They're also launching a private donor campaign, also to be focused on sort of the tourism and local business angle, because again, that is the market that they see in these small rural communities where they're working. They're doing outreach to corporations, especially in the outdoor industry, because that is a big draw in Utah and to the region where they're working. And they're doing increased outreach and coordination with federal and state agencies to determine increased opportunities for funding and partnering with them. Finally, we heard from Friends of the Verde River Greenway and VWORK, the Verde River Watershed Coalition. They are developing their funding plan, and their strategies are to outreach to local supporting groups to really highlight that kind of grassroots community angle of the work that they're doing by working with the veterans associations and tribes. And that's proven to be a really successful strategy, and they've done some really targeted outreach to these groups, which is so far proving to be a successful strategy for them. They are also reaching out to local businesses. Freeport-McMoran is an important partner in that region, and they are helping to bring dollars and even have a in-kind employee program where they help offer volunteer time to get some of the work, actual restoration work completed. They have launched a private donor campaign, and I think the use of the Watercraft software that they spoke about earlier has really been useful in that process, and they've utilized successfully to that end. And they've coordinated with partner agencies such as the NRCS and the Nature Conservancy to apply for NRCS funding, which has allowed them to tap into a new outlet of federal funding that was previously really challenging to access. And they are coordinating with the state of Arizona's partnership. They are in the process of implementing their 10-year action plan and their woody invasive plan, and that will be, or is estimated to be completed in 2020 as well. And they are also developing a communications plan to outline implementation strategies for their funding plan. And they are doing outreach to new foundations and grant programs. And they are doing outreach. They're also launching a private donor campaign, also to be focused on sort of the tourism and local business angle, because again, that is the market that they see in these small rural communities where they're working. They're doing outreach to corporations, especially in the outdoor industry, because that is a big draw in Utah and to the region where they're working. And they're doing increased outreach and coordination with federal and state agencies to determine increased opportunities for funding and partnering with them. Finally, we heard from Friends of the Verde River Greenway and VWORK, the Verde River Watershed Coalition. They are developing their funding plan, and their strategies are to outreach to local supporting groups to really highlight that kind of grassroots community angle of the work that they're doing by working with the veterans associations and tribes. And that's proven to be a really successful strategy, and they've done some really targeted outreach to these groups, which is so far proving to be a successful strategy for them. They are also reaching out to local businesses. Freeport-McMoran is an important partner in that region, and they are helping to bring dollars and even have a in-kind employee program where they help offer volunteer time to get some of the work, actual restoration work completed. They have launched a private donor campaign, and I think the use of the Watercraft software that they spoke about earlier has really been useful in that process, and they've utilized successfully to that end. And they've coordinated with partner agencies such as the NRCS and the Nature Conservancy to apply for NRCS funding, which has allowed them to tap into a new outlet of federal funding that was previously really challenging to access. And they are coordinating with the state of Arizona's effort to establish a payment for watershed services program, which is yet to be developed or is kind of in the very early stages. But they have, again, a spectrum of strategies here. So that is really the examples that I wanted to show you in terms of how these partnerships are isolating key and specific audiences to use their rare resource or their sparse resources to accomplish their funding objectives. And hopefully that was useful to you. Let me know if you have questions. Agencies such as the NRCS and the Nature Conservancy to apply for NRCS funding, which has allowed them to tap into a new outlet of federal funding that was previously really challenging to access. And they are coordinating with the state of Arizona's effort to establish a payment for watershed services program, which is yet to be developed or is kind of in the very early stages. But they have, again, a spectrum of strategies here. So that is really the examples that I wanted to show you in terms of how these partnerships are isolating key and specific audiences to use their rare resource or their sparse resources to accomplish their funding objectives. And hopefully that was useful to you. Let me know if you have questions.
I love the idea of the pyramid, and I've seen it work in other, more in kind of the grassroots and activist type organizations. Are there watershed partnerships that are getting the bulk of their funding from private donors or corporate funds? It seems to me like some of the ones we're working in, the pyramid is reversed. Mm-hmm.
It's true, and I think that pyramid probably applies more to some of these other sectors of nonprofits, because in many cases, if the accompanying slide to that is really a portion of giving. So private donors give, it's like 70% of private giving goes to religious organizations. The next is to health, the next is to education, and it's like 3% goes to environmental organizations, and that includes organizations that support your pets and so forth. So there's a scramble for those private dollars for environmental causes. However, I think that it provides a good model of the opportunity that is there. So with a little bit of investment and creative thinking, there is a huge market out there for that type of funding. And I think the challenge that a lot of the small organizations that we work with face is that they just don't have dedicated staff to that purpose. And so really investing in that up front to ensure that there is adequate development staff on board could really further that cause. Many people who are doing the actual on-the-ground work are doing the grant writing as well, because grant writing is less labor-intensive. Some of you might disagree with that assertion, but yes, it's true. So I don't have any good examples right off the top of my head of the groups that I'm working with. There are plenty out there, but they do tend to be larger organizations like the Nature Conservancy and the Wilderness Society and so forth. But I think that it does set a good model that we should be working towards. And I think diversification is really the key point, whether it's private donors, whether it's some other kind of water market, or if it's working with utility companies to establish a surcharge. The point being that we need to move beyond just working to achieve grant funding is pretty key. Okay, thank you everyone.